Alright, don't be mistaken, you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria live on our network service of the NTA. So let's begin our conversation now with a look at some of the views by some Nigerians. It was compiled by our correspondent Abdul Salam Chibro.
The National Assembly, the legislature, averagely they have performed well from 1999 till date. So, coming in place of the legislative act, they have done incredibly well. I mean, in trying to create job, passing bill for creating of job. They passed the bill for creating of civil defense. Of recent, they passed a bill waiting for assent for creating of Peace Corps.
Honestly, sincerely, I've not really seen our legislative as if they are really working for the masses. I think mostly they work for themselves and for the executive. The things that will benefit them, they always want to make that law scale through more than the ones that will benefit the people.
Actually, they have tried in some areas, but majority of the bills they have been enacting, I think, is for their own personal interests, not the generality of Nigerians.
If I want to say something about that, all the legislation they're making is for their own benefits, not for us. Just imagine the speed they used to pass this their amendment electoral bill, the one they did early this month. Just one day, first reading, second reading within an hour. If it is the bill that is going to benefit the masses, by now they are still going for public hearing and all what have you.
I want to see what they have done so far concerning the citizens of Nigeria.
It's themselves now. I think they just feel about themselves, not with the masses.
No, they have tried a lot, but unfortunately they have some lapses that legislative they are doing. They didn't consider a masses. So we are just praying for them to try and organize a good program for the masses in this country.
A cross-section of the Nigerians speaking to our correspondent, expressing their views on the performance of the legislature in 23 years of Nigeria's democratic experience. We have guests with us in the studios to, of course, drill further into this matter. Let's welcome our regular guests on the program, Professor Osarina Osumbo. Professor Osumbo is a two-time senator of the Federal Republic. He was there from 1999 until 2007. He's also a former governor of Edo State, professor of law, and incidentally, Professor Osumbo, you are also a member of the Constitutional Conference 1994 to 1995, I believe.
That's right.
That Constitutional Conference, sometimes derogatory referred to as the Abuja Conference, came up with some very useful recommendations, part of which continue to affect us today. For instance, the 13% derivation that we have there, the 1999 Constitution. We also had a six-zonal structure that was proposed by the then former Vice President Alex Ekweme. Professor Osumbo, delighted to have you again on Good Morning.
It's my pleasure. Good morning.
Also here with us in the studios is Honorable Mohammed Umara Kumalia. He's a former minority leader in the House of Representatives. He was there in the 5th Assembly. Honorable Kumalia, delighted to have you on the program after a long while.
Thank you. I think I was in the 4th Assembly, I guess.
Oh, 4th.
1999.
In the National Assembly.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay, thank you very much, Kumalia. Yes.
All right. We also have another guest here with us in the studio, Oke Epia, Executive Director, Order Paper Nigeria. First, I hope I got your name right.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this conversation. And again, I'd like to begin my question with the former governor of Edo State and a two-time senator. Just give us your perspective. What did you think of those respondents, the views of those respondents?
Well, first, it's important to point out that it's remarkable that the Nigerian legislature has been able to function as an independent arm of government for an unbroken period of 23 years. This is unprecedented, and it is remarkable, and it's worthy of celebration. And I believe that is why you deemed it necessary to invite us to discuss the achievements or poor non-achievement, depending on the view of the observer, that we've recorded during these past 23 years. With reference to the comments that I had made, the first point that I need to make is that legislators all over the world are not the most popular. They are not the most popular because the people always blame the legislators, perhaps because they are the closest to the ordinary people. You will find when you go to the National Assembly, for instance, there are people from the constituencies, people, ordinary people coming to seek one favor or the other in a way that they cannot reach some members of the executive, like a minister or whatever, but they find it easier to relate with legislators, whether at the National Assembly or even at the state level. And then they expect a lot from the legislators, not cognizant of the fact that there are certain processes and procedures that need to be followed. For the general good of all, it is necessary to lay down rules, procedures that must be adhered to, many of them required by the Constitution itself. So those constraints put limitations on how much the legislator can do. For instance, for citing of projects, it is for the president at the national level, Mr. President, to propose estimates for the budget. The budget is not originated by the legislators, it's originated by Mr. President, the executive branch. And there have been debates all over the years to what extent the National Assembly can tamper with the estimates presented to it for passage. In other words, what I'm saying is that there are limitations that members of the public don't necessarily appreciate. The third point that I wish to make is that, again, is a universal truism that law is perceived as being in the interest of the propertied, the privileged. You know, there is a general notion. If you look at for lawyers, they know the theory of law. There are people who believe that law is for the people who own property. The poor man who doesn't own property has little or nothing to do with law. So there is that perception that lawmakers pass laws for themselves because they are the ones that own property. They are the ones that need law to protect themselves. That is why people were saying, oh, they make these laws for themselves. They are the ones that benefit.
But they also talked about the speed.
Yes, I will come to that. Again, sometimes people say the legislature is slow. They are blamed for being slow, sluggish, because of the constraints that I spoke about earlier. But when they are fast, they are again blamed for being too fast. So if you are too slow, they blame you. If you are too fast, they blame you. But it is within the right of the public to judge and assess those that they have elected. I don't take that away from them, and those elected must be responsive to the views, to the yearnings and aspirations of those they represent. And But I will say that the legislature, I haven't said initially that the legislature has performed very well, but unfortunately there are also instances where they haven't been impressive. And the biggest example of that for me is the Electoral Act, which is the talk of the moment. The Electoral Act that was signed this year, 2022, had its origin as far back as about 2016 or 2017 when it was first originated. And there have been problems, flaws. Several times they pass it and send it to Mr. President for his assent, and the President detects flaws, a lot of flaws, and returns the bill. And
Your Excellency, I think we should just pause you for a while. We will come to those nitty-gritty.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sure Kisley has a question for other... Kisley?
All right, Honorable Kumalia, take us back to what happened between 1999 and 2003 when we had the fourth assembly. That was, of course, the first assembly for the current Fourth Republic. We knew there were a number of issues, and it's like an aircraft taking off. Sometimes you run into air pockets, and then you have turbulence before you gain altitude. What was it like in the period 1999 to 2003?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And I'd like to say that those were very trying moments for the legislature. If you recall, Nigeria at that time, I said 1999, had gone through a period of military rule, an unbroken period of military rule for about 16 years before we had democracy in 1999. And now over this period of time, the greatest arm of government that had suffered was the legislature, because under the legislature, under the military rule, the executive and the legislature were subsumed in one, because you have what they call the Armed Forces Military Council, which serves as the legislative arm of the government. So for a long time, people had forgotten about what the legislature was about, what they were supposed to, what their functions were supposed to be, under a constitutional democracy. So when we came in 1999, the first challenge was for Nigerians to appreciate what the hell is the role of these people. They see you in a big chamber debating issues and trying to, pass laws which they hardly understood what it meant, because they have never experienced it. Now, the other challenge we had was the executive arm of government. Here, both at the level of the presidency and at the level of the bureaucracy, we are not used to having the legislature interfering in governance. So in other words, the legislature was more or less being regarded as meddlesome interlopers. They are just mere busybodies, because they never believed or knew that indeed their role is entrenched in the Constitution. Now, because of that, there was a lot of friction between the legislature and the executive on the one hand, represented by the president, the ministers, and so on, and then between the legislature and the bureaucracy, i.e. the permanent secretaries, the heads of agencies, and so on, who never reported. So in terms of performing oversight functions for members of the legislature, it was very difficult when you invite them to come and defend their budget. They're not used to it. So that was a major problem. Another problem that was very apparent that time was the issue of the funding of the legislature. Because of the absence of the legislature for over 16 years, there was nothing on the ground. There was no infrastructure. And there was no capacity. Even staff that had worked in the legislature, that had experience. I was a staff in the legislature because I was trained as a legislative draftsman during the Babangida era for that Babangida National Assembly, that transition that never
with no go areas
that not completed.
Yes.
Now, the only experienced members of staff that could be used at that time were the remaining, those that worked in 1979 to 1984, and the few of us that were trained subsequent to that. So even in terms of the staffing of the legislature, there was a huge problem. And the like I said, the problem of funding, there was nothing. So if you pass a budget and say provide photocopiers, provide computers, provide this and that, they were like, what are you going to do with all this? The legislature, you have 360 members of the House of Representatives, 109 senators, each with having an office. You expect to have an office with your retinue of staff and doing your work. So because of that, there was a little challenge. But all these challenges have been overcome over time because the system had gotten used to it. We're talking of 22 years of unbroken 23 years of unbroken parliamentary work, as it were. And like it was said, the legislature has come a long way. It has improved in its processes and procedures, entrenched certain core processes of doing its work, and the Nigerian populace has begun to appreciate and even critique, as it were. And this is what we are seeing here. This is, for me, is very important because it's a feedback through the legislature about their performance. Nobody should dismiss this. You are as good as how you are perceived, especially if you are an elected representative of the people. And that's what the legislature or the members of the legislature are. I remember in 2002, the Electoral Act in 2002 that was passed. There was a joint committee of the Senate and the House. Incidentally, I was the chairman of the team from the House of Representatives that was supposed to meet with the Senate team. Professor Osumbo, sitting next opposite me here, was the chairman of the panel from the Senate side, and you had a very robust team of members of the two chambers who sat down, went through the 2002 Electoral Act close by close. And that brings me to the issue of what Professor Osumbo alluded to, which is the sometimes rather hasty manner or the lack of diligence sometimes in ensuring that certain key clauses in an important legislation like the Electoral Act are not left out by way of oversight, So to that extent, I think the legislature needs to really have some laser focus whenever they are trying to perform their primary responsibility of lawmaking. It's easy to have public hearings. It's easy to undertake oversight functions. You go somewhere, you have the facts, you ask questions. But when all is said and done, and you bring all the inputs in, and then pass the legislation, like I said, because I was trained as a legislative draftsman, that is a lawyer that is responsible for ensuring that the law is drafted in the way and manner the members of the legislature want it to be drafted. What is in their mind as at the time that they are passing this law. So every letter, every clause matters in this respect. And therefore, on their own part, they must communicate their intention as clearly as possible. But where you have, for instance, the convention for the Congress and the conventions for the political parties that is taking place right now for the 2023 election, one of the clauses that they forgot to insert was the clause that has to do with statutory delegates. Today, we walk up to a situation where the president of the country is not a delegate to elect who his presidential candidate is going to be, who his governor is going to be in his state, his senator or House of Representative or House Assembly member. The members of the legislature themselves have shot themselves in the foot. They are all not, voters or delegates at the convention. So they are not statutory delegates. Governors are not delegates. No statutory. I, and indeed Professor Osumbo, who are former members of the National Assembly, and in my case, a former principal officer of the National Assembly, I am a statutory delegate by virtue of the position I held in any party that I am. But they all shut us out. This is the height of, if you like, the lack of diligence in ensuring that these things are given some kind of attention. And that brings me back to perhaps the last point I'll make on this, which is the need for the National Assembly to continuously build capacity. Because during our time, as much as we were new, there was a lot of effort that was being done to build capacity for members of the legislature. I don't know what is happening now. When I see the budget of the National Assembly, compared to our time, the difference is so huge. And therefore, that it is very important for the leadership of the National Assembly, both the House, Senate and the House, to ensure that they train legislators in the act of lawmaking, just like they need to train their staff in the act of lawmaking. It is very important. And these are the only ways that they can justify some of the budgetary allocation that has been a subject of criticism by the public in terms of the National Assembly taking so much and so on and so forth. So this is how far we had fared at that time. And but I must say on the positive side that a lot has happened.
Okay, we will turn to those positive sides. Okay, before you pop your next question, Honorable Kumalia talked about training. I'm sure it's a positive development. There's now an Institute for Legislative Studies, I believe, somewhere in Metama. But the key point you said is that it's not just capacity building for the legislative staff, but for the legislators themselves.
Very important. Very, very important point that he has raised. Okay, well, we're looking at 23 years of legislature, unbroken, legislative work, which is commendable. A 23-year-old child today will probably be serving, concluded his or her, education, tertiary institution, and in our society may still be under the tutelage of his or her parents or not. But the bottom line is that that child is still, receiving some form of attention, has not really attained the maturity that it's supposed to. Has our legislative arm of government come to maturity? What's your perspective?
Thank you very much. And I recall that it's very fashionable in the early days of the Fourth Republic, much until a couple of years into it. We like the term nascent democracy. We would say, use the phrase a lot, Nigeria is a nascent democracy, and the citizens need to be very patient with the leaders, the executive and the legislature, and so that speaks to the point you are trying to anchor your question on. 23 years down the line, are we still nascent democracy to the extent that there are yearning gaps around service delivery by the National Assembly? Service delivery respects to the three major functions of lawmaking, representation, and the performance of oversight. I agree with Professor Sumbo that yes, we have come a long way and there are a few things to celebrate. Could we have more to actually celebrate? I would say yes, because we have seen, like I said, gaps, that we should not be seeing. But let me also throw back to contextualization, because, a 23-year-old child already has some form of history, and I like the point that Mala made about the background to the Fourth Republic, the military, rule and all of that. Let me add to those, because we must be fair. and objective in our criticisms. The context within which we analyze the performance or otherwise of the National Assembly must be seen around these lights. So apart from the military background, the character of the executive arm of government, and let me be very specific, of the president in power has a role to play with respect to how the National Assembly delivers its services. There is also the issue around the content and character of members of the National Assembly themselves. So you see the National Assembly peopled by individuals who sometimes are unable to hold their own, who sometimes are unable to stand up to their name and stand up to their responsibilities in terms of checks and balances. You see a National Assembly that is also sometimes filled with individuals, or you have some individuals who are rather hollow. It will interest you. If you cast your mind back to the early assemblies, 4th Assembly, 5th, 6th assemblies, with the quality and character of debate in plenary, you cannot see we have the same kind of quality and character of debate as we currently have in the last 1, 2, 3 and current assemblies. So you see some form of diminishing quality with respect to contributions, debates, delivery of service. What I'm trying to say is that yes, there is the executive arm of government, the character of the presidency, the character and content of members of the National Assembly themselves. Then a third one I'd like to add is also the way both chambers of the National Assembly, because we have a bicameral legislature, both chambers of the National Assembly are able to relate with themselves, are able to coordinate and ensure that services are delivered, with minimal frictions, with minimal ego. So these are contexts, and the point was already laid by, of course, the videos you showed earlier, by the feedback from citizens, about how they perceive. So there's, of course, the general issue of misconceptions, and inadequate, understanding of the roles and functions of the legislature. So all of this put together must be seen is the basis, is the context to be able to analyze the performance or otherwise of the National Assembly, with respect to lawmaking, representation, and the performance of oversight. Having laid this foundation, the question is, 33 years, are we old enough to be able to say, look, we have done well enough to give ourselves a pat on the back, or to give the National Assembly a pat on the back? Like I said, yes, there are some success stories, but there are also learning gaps. And the earlier speakers have spoken about certain laws. Where you pass laws in a hurry, or you take your time to pass laws, and then there are gaps, embarrassing gaps, like we are seeing in the case of the Electoral Act. But we have also seen cases where lots of attention, lots of grits, lots of work have gone into the passage of law, and we've seen quality legislations. What I want to actually zero in on in this initial comment is that these gaps have been very pronounced and acute with respect to the performance of oversight. And this is where really I think that the National Assembly have scored below par in 23 years. I know that the issues around the character of the executive would always play up. How powerful is the president? How powerful is the party in power, and all of that with the majority in the National Assembly? But the way that we have not been able to get the executive to deliver services, because the National Assembly is deficient in the performance of its oversight functions, is a critical appraiser point for me. And I think that this is a conversation that we must keep, on the front burner, and ensure to say, in the next 23 years, we should not be having this kind of things. I agree that, the National Assembly is not the best it doesn't have the best image, like Professor Sumbo said, across the world, But we should seek a deliberate, conscious, and sustained efforts by the National Assembly to, one, try to correct this misunderstanding, these wrong conceptions and misperceptions about the National Assembly. It doesn't do that enough. And to be able to deliver services, efficiently, effectively, so that citizens can say, yes, we see what they are doing. I give you one final example. The National Assembly showed character in the fourth assembly in getting the NDDC to become what it, as a law, to pass the NDDC law. I mean, we know the struggle. We know what it took for the National Assembly to eventually veto the president at that time, and then we have that law. That was kudos to the National Assembly. But see the pitiable situation the NDDC has become. And why is it so? Because the National Assembly has gone to sleep on one hand, and the National Assembly, with due respect to them, has also seen the NDDC as a cash cow, where they will join the executive and begin to see how to bake and sustain this cake in the overall interest and welfare and improve life and living conditions of the people of the Niger Delta area. They have made the NDDC a mess. You see all the issues around standards, corruption. What kind of services does the NDDC deliver? And why is this so? Because the National Assembly is not only not doing oversight, it's also complicit in what we are seeing play out in the NDDC. So that's just an example I wanted to highlight. But by and large...
Okay. Off your mic in the meantime. Off your mic. And I'm sure that I'll be asked to know what that means when they is implied. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll return to you in the course of this very interesting conversation. I want to come back to Professor Osumbo. Professor Osumbo, you permit me again to ask you and then your honorable colleague to step back into the very beginnings of this 23-year journey and use that as a foundation probably to also evaluate what went on. Part of what has emerged from observers of Nigeria's Fourth Republic is the conflation of duties between the legislature and the executive. Sometimes now you find lawmakers pretending to perform executive functions, making executive promises to their constituents. And some persons would say that this is the foundation of the conflict that lawmakers normally will have with the executive branch and sometimes even with the state governments. It wasn't as if there was no experience for those of us who are come of age. Some of these things we didn't hear or see in the Second Republic from 1979 to 1983. But it appears that a lawmaker also wants to be seen as somebody who is delivering projects, delivering programs, and so on and so forth. And then you get into altercations, you get into conflicts with the executive branch. What was the mindset of the lawmakers at the very beginning? Did they find themselves in competition with the executive branch or in collaboration for the ultimate good of the citizens?
Well, very important question, Kingsley. And again, from the background report, one of the respondents was talking about legislators benefiting themselves, as it were. And one issue which also has cast the legislature in negative light in the past years is what they regard as the humongous pay that they get, the huge millions that they get every month. This is one of the things that people cite when they say legislators are only after their personal interest. But the truth of the matter is that what those legislators are being paid, whether as constituency projects or as their personal monthly emoluments, we don't really know exactly how much it is. Some say even a senator, by some accounts, gets more than 30 million a month. I don't know if that is true, but these are some of the figures that people talk about. This is due to the pressure on legislators. During the campaigns, you go around as a legislature promising to deliver certain things for your electorate. When they vote for you, in the case of a senator, when I get to Abuja, I will ensure that government is able to provide water, is able to provide hospitals for you. And that is normal. That is normal because even in the most sophisticated democracies, legislators promise those kind of things and are expected to attract government development projects to their constituencies, and they assess them by how much of this they are able to do. But part of the conflicts that we experienced in the Fourth National Assembly in 1999 was that the bureaucracy, the executive, just as Honorable Komalia mentioned, based on where we were coming from, the military rule, didn't believe that the legislature as a separate arm of government was even important. And when it came to budgeting, the budgets presented to the legislators don't have the input of the elected representatives of the people. Often you will find that there are projects that are put there by the executives in ministries, by directors and people who don't even go visit their constituencies. Some of them some may not go. The people don't know them. They don't even know they have such directors from their constituencies in the ministry. But these are the people who formulate the budget. And so when these budgets come to the National Assembly and you see in your constituency, what am I going to tell my people? So that is the beginning, this is the genesis of conflicts, that the legislature wants to be able to ensure there's something on the budget. He can go back and tell his people, I have been able to represent you well, and we are bringing this project to the constituency. But that has created a lot of frictions over the years, and people say, to what extent can the legislature amend or change the figures and the estimates that were presented by the executive? That perhaps is why the legislators have found a way around it through constituency projects. And we were there. It was during our time that, in fact, it was during the period of Senate President Ayim, because his two predecessors didn't enjoy a very good period, particularly with the presidency. So when he came in, part of what he did was to negotiate with the presidency that we are prepared to cooperate with you if you also help us to be able to have projects for our various constituencies. Because every legislature, or most legislators, will want to be re-elected. We want to be able to go back home and tell people, I have served you well and I deserve to be re-elected. If you are not able to tell them what you did, then there will be problems about re-election. That is one. The other is with respect to the ability to fund developments by yourself. Again, this is pressure from the electorate. Honorable Komalia talked about the improved understanding about the role of the legislature. There's improved understanding definitely by the executive. But I'm not sure that the electorate itself has a good understanding of the duties, the roles and responsibilities of legislators. That is why there's so much demand. If you are not able to give money to the leaders, then you can be rest assured that a money bag who has plenty of money will unseat you during the next election. So it's a survivor, human being, nature likes, people like to survive. And this survival instinct is in every being. So that is why you find that there's this huge funds that are paid to legislators to be able to service the constituents, the C leaders, and also to be able to cite projects on their own, which again is a failing or inadequacy on the part of the executive, particularly at the state level. Because the executive at the state level is not able to do some of these things for the people, there's pressure on the senator, on the member of the House of Reps, to do for the constituencies what the executive, what the government at the state level ought to be doing. So there's need for improved understanding particularly by the electorate, to know the principal responsibility of legislators. Because if this is not done, the legislative work will suffer, as we are beginning to see. Mr. Oke mentioned the point that there appears to be a diminishing effect in the quality of people that are elected into legislative positions. And these days, it appears that the electorate are more impressed by money bags than by people who have the intellect. Without meaning to diminish or cast a slur on the members of the current National Assembly, I will just cite an example. In 1999, in the Senate, there were 5 professors elected. I was elected straight from the university. But now, in the Senate, I believe there's only 1 professor. He's doing his 3rd term. That is Professor Borofis. I doubt if in Nigeria today, you can have a professor from the university being elected a senator. He doesn't have the resources. He won't be able to have the resources to do it.
He can't see delegates.
He can't see delegates. This is not the problem of, it's a problem of the people, the electorate themselves, who elect these people. They want the delegates wants to be seen. But professors, I'm not saying only professors can make good legislators, but it's just an example of the diminishing quality that we are talking about. If you elect a money bag just because he has money, not because of what he has upstairs, his intellect, then you can expect the kind of things that we are seeing, and maybe even worse in years to come if we do not reflect and step back and do what is proper.
Sanitation, but do we really think that the electorate or the people do not have fairly good understanding of what the duties and responsibilities of the legislatures are? Because there is a nexus between lawmaking and good governance. Good governance in the sense that they have access and rights to some goods and services, and when they don't have that, they have recourse to the people whom they have elected to represent them. So I don't really know if that is absolutely true, because if you listen to the respondents, they tell you, some of them said, look, yes, they make it, yes, they try in the area of lawmaking, but in the representation and in some areas they have not. So they already have demarcations, degrees of assessment. I don't know what you think.
Well, democracy rests on 3 arms of government, and they have 3 separate functions: the legislative arm, the executive arm, and the judicial arm. When they say government is not just the executive. The mistake that people make in Nigeria is to, even members of the legislature, I'm surprised sometimes you see a member of the National Assembly say government must do this, government must. Are you not government? You yourself, you are part of government. So the different arms have different functions. I agree. The principal responsibility of a legislator is lawmaking, oversight functions,
and
representation. Not citing, not building of classroom blocks, not sinking of boreholes, not
unbundle representation for us.
Sorry, yes, what I said. What a legislature, the proper thing is that in budgeting, when it like place in the US where we borrowed these things from, I don't think a US senator will be building a classroom or sinking but what he will do is to ensure that the budget, there are projects, which is what the members of the National Assembly have been clamoring for. Involve us in the budgeting process. Let us put projects in the budget so that we can go home and tell our people, I have been able to ensure that there's provision for something like this for you in our budget. Release the money. Again, our experience was that even when you succeeded in putting a project on the budget, the money is not released and the project is not executed. So if these things are properly done by those whose responsibility it is to do them, then things will work well. That is really good governance. Good governance is not a legislator going to build classrooms, going to tar roads. That is not good governance. Good governance is that he should be able to do what he is mandated to do, what the Constitution obliges him to do, not necessarily what the man on the street wants him to do if he's to stand a chance of being re-elected.
All right, Professor Osumbo, thank you very much. Honorable Kumaria, let's have your take also on this. What was your experience in the House of Representatives in terms of the conflation of duties in the early stages, and what now appears to be a hangover effect in the relationship between the legislature and the executive on the one hand, and between the legislature and their constituents on the other?
I think you have touched on a very important issue that has to do with the functions of the legislature. Like it has been said clearly, and as envisaged by the Constitution, the primary function of the legislature is lawmaking. Now, even the budget itself, it's a law, the Appropriation Act. You pass the law permitting the executive to spend money out of the government coffers that is approved and as clearly stated in the act. Now, what are the issues here? Especially in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the legislature in especially the budgeting process vis-a-vis the functions of the legislature. I'll be honest with you. The legislature was my primary constituency. I served there as a technocrat. I served there as a parliamentarian. So there is no institution of government I've worked in my life like I have in the legislature. So the legislature is close to my heart. But I'll be lying to you if I tell you that my heart does not bleed when I see what is happening today. Now, what Professor Osumbo is trying very hard to explain is the issue of conflict of interest. And that's what brings about the suspicion and the lack of appreciation and indeed the conflict between the legislature and the executive arm of government. In the United States, what we call constituency projects here is called earmarks. In the US budget, they have an amount of money that is there for the legislators to appropriate for the purpose of meeting certain basic needs of their constituencies. That's what we call, so it's not something entirely new. However, where does the conflict arise? The conflict arises on a couple of fronts. One, where you remove a proposal by the executive that perhaps is well thought out, is well planned, perhaps is part of a medium or long-term or even a short-term plan of government, and substitute it with an unplanned project that you have an interest in. That's point number one. Number two, you have a situation whereby the project you are inserting in itself has not clearly been thought out, has not been planned, there's no design for it. You want to do a rural road in your constituency, it has not been designed. But simply because you want to have it, you just put it in the budget, and it has not been costed properly. So it's undesigned, unplanned, and it's not costed. That's point number two. Thirdly, and that is the worst of it all, is you are inserting the project and you want to determine who the contractor is. Or, in some cases, the members of the legislature themselves are indeed the contractors. Indeed, what has brought about this suspicion, the feedback you are hearing from the public, is a function of the lack of trust because of the way and manner legislators have carried on with their work, how they carry themselves, how they have applied themselves to their work over the years, they have crossed the red line in some instances, whereby they interfere in the budgeting process to the extent of even changing the entire outlook of the budget and superimposing projects of their own interest, some not even constituency projects, for the purpose of, at the end of the day, cashing out. And here, there is a conspiracy. Because you see, we are leaders in this country. And the essence of why you invited us here to come and speak for Nigerians to hear what we are saying is to speak specifically to how we can improve the system so that Nigerians will be better off for it. There is a conspiracy between the technocrats, the civil servants in the various agencies of government and members of parliament, to the exclusion mostly of even the president himself. The president is the leader of the country. The president is the person elected by the whole country to provide leadership for the country and the leader of the executive arm of government. But here we are. There is a conspiracy between the parliamentarians and the bureaucracy, whereby they sit down, collaborate, agree on projects, and at the end of the day, 50% of the projects are not executed, but the monies are nowhere to be found. And the effect of this is seen by the people in the outlook, courage, disposition of individual legislators. Some of them live extremely ostentatious lifestyles. You were elected 4 years ago. We knew who you were. We knew what you were doing before you became a member of parliament. 3 years or 4 years down the line, you have acquired, and amassed so much wealth that you cannot explain. And these people that are talking are not blind. You are a member of the community. You are here. So these are some of the things that is bringing conflict. Nobody is saying that a parliamentarian has no right to look at the budget and to ensure, like Professor Osimbo said, that there are some aspects of the budget that touch on your constituency. When I was in parliament, in my constituency, I had rural electrification projects. I had, what do they call it? This healthcare, primary healthcare centers. I had boreholes sunk all across Maiduguri. I don't know who the contractors were, but my interest was to ensure that those projects were executed. And sometimes it's after I have left the National Assembly that some of these contractors will tell me, sir, I was the one that built so in your constituency. I don't know who they are. The question we need to ask ourselves is this the case today? So my advice to the leadership and the membership of the National Assembly is that the whole world is watching. And we should not take the citizens for granted. And this is what is causing some of this problem, the mistrust. And here, I'm not only talking to the members of the National Assembly, I'm also talking to the co-collaborators, the technocrats in the government agencies and ministries, agencies and departments who collaborate with them, so much so that the budget does not have the impact on society as much as it should, because there's a lot of bleeding along the way.
The technocrats are said sometimes to be blackmailed by the lawmakers, that if there's no quid pro quo, then they will not pass your capital project estimates.
Yeah, but it's not personal. If they don't pass it, so be it. As a technocrat, if I'm a permanent secretary and have projects that I have promoted, if they pass it, all well and good. If they don't pass it, well, that's it. It's nothing personal to me. I am working for the government of the Federation of Nigeria, and I'm being paid. Tomorrow I could leave and somebody is going to take that place. So you see, we have to over time show some resilience, show some capacity to be able to stand our ground and insist during our time, Osimo is here, as much as possible. We did that, but in the reverse order. And what is that? Trying to insist both for the understanding not only of the executive arm of government, that is the president and his ministers on the one hand, but also the technocrats to appreciate the role we have in nation and respect it. So they allow us to function as legislators. But here we are, today, 23 years down the line, they appreciate the role of the legislature. They know you have the powers. But those powers are not being utilized for the good of the common man in a broad sense. So to that extent, we need to really move towards ensuring that the work we are doing is for the interest of the people. And that is why a lot of people, including highly educated, intelligent, even lawyers, I hear them on television, I see them and hear them on television, saying that the legislature has no power to tamper with the budgeting process. I completely disagree. They do.
Let's just put you on hold. I've allowed you to come to a conclusion, but we're running out of our break time. So when we come back, you just conclude your thought. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. Please, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue with our conversation. Right, welcome back. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria. And quickly, let me just take this question to Okay, earlier you talked about the content and character of those who populate the National Assembly. And I'd like you to speak more to that, because the Constitution clearly provides, the basis for eligibility, to be at the National Assembly. And in some cases, we have also complained about the people, when some executives, go to the National Assembly, a lot of people do complain. So what do you think, how has that eroded the quality or the effectiveness of legislature, of the act of lawmaking, and how can it be restored?
Well, thank you very much. We are in consensus in this conversation that there's been a gradual erosion of the content and character of members of the National Assembly. Why is it so? The electorates have a role to play. They have a blame to share. But you see, increasingly, the National Assembly itself and its members have also been unable to elevate beyond the mundane. The conversation shortly before the break around constituency project is a perfect example where, legislators themselves, a good number of them see their roles as being able to go and do projects for their people. So when we do these appraisers, annual appraisers at other people of members of the National Assembly, in terms of lawmaking, passage, sponsorship, passage of bills and all of that, and we see the pushback we have received. It's not, because the data isn't correct. The pushback, even at the highest level, one of those plenary citizens, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, they speak to it, and he said, lawmaking is not the only function of members of the National Assembly. They are also doing this, they're also doing that. We are speaking to the very fundamental issue of why members of the National Assembly are elected in the first place. So you see that sense of misplacement, if you allow me to use that word, of their own roles and functions. And that's tying down to the fundamental question of who are these guys, ladies and gentlemen, who get elected, who like to call themselves distinguished and honorable. They are really what those appellations say they are. If you look at the 4th, 5th, and to some extent the 6th Assembly, and I refer to the quality of debates, you see it's distinguished, and I'll use that word, advisedly now. Stand up and speak for 5-10 minutes. The oratory, the power of delivery, the articulation. You would love to listen to parliamentary debates. Do you see that these days anymore? The days of the charisma, the era of leadership, the era of membership. The quality, the productiveness of debate, deep debates. Do you see that anymore? Even as long as as let me not say little, because it is powerful. The power of the gathered these days is not fully utilized. So the presiding officer says those in favor of this say aye. Before the other try say no, the gathered is gone. So you see just how well.
Sometimes I think the person I'm watching are not hearing well, whether it is the eyes that actually have it or the nose.
Before you know that, it's done.
So these are the issues.
Yes.
And so if people, come with that kind of content and character, certainly the kind of service delivery you will have is poor. And that's what we are having. And that's why, the preponderance or the focus is, okay, I've had conversations in this studio, thanks to the generosity for inviting me, where members tell you that, no, I mean, it's the projects. Yes, the people want to see the projects, but you have a duty, a sacred constitutional responsibility to deliver on lawmaking. You also have that duty to explain to the electorate. Now we are in a campaign electionary season. I would advise that we are also able to pay attention to the kind of promises that members of the National Assembly or prospective members of the National Assembly will be making to their people. It's the same things we are talking about. They're not going to be saying, look, I am going to go raise this motion to see that the issues of erosion, we tackle it once and for all in the Southeast. I'm going to go make sure that I sponsor this bill to make sure that the issues of, unemployment in my constituency will deal with it. No, I'm going to go to the National Assembly and come back to make sure that, I fix this road, I do. So that's the thing. That's the thing. That's what I mean by the content and character of individuals. Unfortunately, it's also a reflection of the content and character of the society we have seen. That Professor made a great point. We should, as individuals, as electorates, as delegates, also bear in mind the overriding national interest, the overriding public interest, and see that we choose and elect persons with some degree, pedigree, integrity, record of performance into the National Assembly, and if we begin to do that in our own individual various spheres and spaces, perhaps we would have less and less of this kind of conversations. Of course, we agree that political science teaches that politics is the authoritative allocation of value, and so there will be conflicts, minimal conflict, but we can manage them to very minimal levels, and everyone has a role to play. The political parties have roles to play, the presidency, the executive have roles to play, the legislature themselves, they have the more fundamental roles to play, if you ask me, and of course, citizens and all of that have roles to play, and you have done a great job by the rules of, enlightenment and awareness creation, that you are doing here, in the media. So if you ask me,
on NTA.
On NTA, I mean, the largest television network in Africa, So
thank you for the compliment.
The point is that we all have roles to play, and now that we are approaching another election cycle, this is another time to make deep reflections. What kind of individuals are presenting themselves to us to be elected? Who do we want to go for? Do we want to go for those who can see the delegates? Or we want to go for those who have capacity and competence and a history and record of performance and get them elected to populate the National Assembly?
Okay, thank you very much, for your incisive comments. We are pressed for time. Always when you have great guests with tremendous insights into a subject matter, time just runs out, Claire. But I know that if we were getting into some of the core achievements, we will be able to mention and discuss some of the points I want to immediately tick off before I pop my next question. Our viewers will remember that 12 years ago, for instance, the country faced a constitutional crisis during the terminal ill health of the then President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, and then they came up with the doctrine of necessity, which was a very significant thing to bypass the logjam that had occurred in the country. That was the role of the National Assembly on that occasion. We have also talked about the fact that it isn't as if there are no laws to deal with corruption and other issues. But we always said that, look, we needed to have institutions, grow these institutions to deal with corruption. It is to the credit of the Fourth Assembly, for instance, that the ICPC Act was the first piece of legislation to have been passed in the fight against corruption, as it were. And that was followed almost immediately by the EFCC Act, and today we are seeing what those agencies are doing. But there is a point, gentlemen, that the two former lawmakers, honorable and distinguished, have raised about the response of lawmakers to the demands of their constituents. For instance, how this will trickle down into the insertion of projects into the appropriation to ensure that this gets to the people. In principle, that would appear not to be a bad idea, but I've also heard from the executive branch, ministers of works, for instance, they say that the Honorable Kumara, you spoke to that, the atomization of projects does not then generate a critical mass for us to get proper value along the economic corridors. I'll give you an example. Somebody will say, for instance, take the highway from Onitsha to Port Harcourt. Fix it. Take the highway from Benin straight to Kano. Make it an expressway. And if you have yearly budgetary allocation for that project, within a few years, you're able to complete it. But the appropriation goes to the National Assembly, and everybody who is off that economic corridor is asking, but what about my constituents? What will I tell them? So move this from the economic corridor, take it away, and that's why you see contractors get mobilized to site. 1 year, 2 years, they are struggling. The civil works that they have done get washed away by the rainy season, and then they come back again asking for variation. One project will take more than 20 years, and we are saying, why are we still here? So perhaps it may be useful for the lawmakers. So, okay, have a rethink. I've also raised this point on 1 or 2 occasions, and the response was precisely what the gentlemen have said here, that we have to cater for the interests of our constituents. That's one leg. Very quickly, another issue that we'd like us to discuss. We are focused on the National Assembly, but we do know that 23 years also affects the subnational entities, the state houses of assembly. The dynamism that we find at the national level is, some would say, sickeningly absent at the state level. Some persons would even ask whether there is a need for us to continue to have state houses of assembly at, considering the levels of their performance and the fact that even the quality and caliber that OK talked about probably will be more deficient at those levels, and the citizens do not appear to have that benefit at all. Your Excellency, also, but let's have your insight into this. How can we reinvigorate the State House of Assembly? We had great State House of Assembly during the Second Republic. We mustn't forget.
Well, first...
and I should add that, I'm sorry, sir, you may have to do that in less than 60 seconds.
Okay. Well, first, I would just emphasize we need to be more disciplined in budgeting and even other aspects of governance. We need to practice federalism, which we have adopted, which we have chosen. The weakness of the states is that we are not really practicing federalism as it ought to be. So that in summary answers your question, that if the states are strong and operating the federal system as it ought to be, then those problems probably will not arise. But very quickly, just to add for the way forward, is that you mentioned ICPC and other institutions. I've said this here before, is that we need to be proactive. It's not ICPC, EFCC comes in after the offense has been committed. We should be proactive by putting in place mechanisms to ensure that are proactive, to ensure that the crime does not even take place in the first place. Preventive. That is good governance. And then to follow in line with what you said, there needs to be more training. And I've made this point here before. I had the privilege of presenting a paper during the retreat for these members-elect of the National Assembly when they came in 2019. But it seems that the paper that I delivered has not had any impact at all.
Professor Sunga, I'm sorry, I already apologized.
We
need
refresher.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'd just like to get Honorable Commander's response in just 30 seconds, if you may. What should be the language of the aspirants to the National Assembly now that we're into election period, and what are the red flags that the electorate should look out for in choosing those to represent them?
I think what is important is they should look at people in terms of what they can bring to the table. Anybody that wants you to elect him as your representative, look at what he has in terms of his background, his experience, his outlook in terms of how he takes life in itself. Do you understand what I mean? So to that extent, I believe people should elect leaders that have the tendency of looking after the interest of their constituents rather than focusing primarily on their personal interest. I think this is where the public itself has a role to play in this regard.
Honorable Mohammed Umara Kumalia, former Minority Leader, House of Representatives in the 4th National Assembly, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for your very insightful contribution. Let me also appreciate Oke Epia, Executive Director, Order Paper Nigeria. Thank you very much for your contributions. And Professor Osarine Osumbo, former Governor of Edo State, a two-time Senator of the Federal Republic, and a Professor of Law. Thank you, Excellency. Let's quickly take a look at sports now. French authorities ascribe fan chaos incident at the finals of UEFA Champions League in Paris to high-level ticket fraud and other stories.
That's been Good Morning Nigeria for today. As always, we appreciate your tuning in. Join us again tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock for another edition of the program. I'm Kingsley Osado.
I am Claire Abilabu Abdul Razak, and do have a great day. But just a reminder, as always, join us in the fight against rape and rapists. That way, you too can be a star. From us, bye-bye.